Welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking about extreme crisis leadership with Rob Currie. Rob, great first segment there. You started talking about culture, and I had a question about culture is um, culture change and culture within an organization often gets mandated by leadership. This is what we expect. And then as we look at leadership, they're not following what they say. So how do we deal with that? How would you deal with that? Because you mentioned the military, and I know that's going to be very rigid. People say they do what they say. That from
Mhm.
everyone I know that's been in
Understood.
the military. So, what are your thoughts about that?
You've hit it there, is that there's organizations I'm trying to attribute the saying culture, this is Simon Sinek, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that organizations that are high performing culture. So I just look back at the one thing that I took away from my time with our Canadian Special Forces is the level of family brotherhood and sisterhood. I served with, won't get into the details, but there are women in our Canadian Special Forces served with, and that bond, even to the point today, I could pick up the phone and call many people there, and they would be the first ones to come and help out personally. It's for life, and that culture is shared. Now, how did that happen? Part of that, from that environment, people are selected. They go through very special training to make sure that they will fit culturally. Because there's lots of fit soldiers in other units. There's lots of super smart soldiers in other units. Not everyone is cut out to do the special forces piece.
Hmm.
I'd say the biggest difference is a little more autonomy in what you think. I think most people would think orders flow top down in the traditional, and they do, and that. But we expect more from a Canadian, like a special forces soldier, as to a little bit more thinking on your feet, and a lot more empowerment when you are out doing things, and there's no general to call on the phone to fix things, and that. So just that's a lived culture, and it took a long time to get there. And part of it was learned from the histories of, the SAS and other groups that were ahead in the tier one community. Coming back to the essence of your question, looking in the corporate world, in that often when organizations realize there's something wrong with our culture, now there's different experts that can come in from an HR perspective, psychologists, and understand that there's not a healthy culture, maybe even toxic to a certain extent. You can do certain remediations, but there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction to, you know what, we're going to come up with a new mission statement. We're going to put this up on the website, and we're going to write policy about this. I've never seen a client fix their culture with policy. What I have seen, and it touches to your comment earlier, our leaders understand. Sometimes boards will change leaders and go, Rob's not the right guy for this organization. He just doesn't have the right personality. And he certainly doesn't espouse the values that will create this culture moving forward. So we need a new leader. So sometimes it's new leadership, sometimes it's a change from the current leadership team, but it has to be lived and it has to be authentic. And I know that sounds really simple. The organizations that do it thrive. I've worked with some clients, and I'm like, why do you love it here? Is it because you've got free coffee and a cat? And they go, no, I never leave. I've had offers for 10,000 more a year, 20,000. I won't leave. They take care of me. Okay. And we're truly a team. And I go, yeah, well, kind of no, 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 you don't understand. Like we, we can take as much leave as we want. And I'm like, what? Yeah, you take vacation. And I said, there must be abuses. They said, no, it'll get noticed. You're not contributing. And you're an adult. If you need to go away for 2 weeks to recharge, you go away for 2 weeks and recharge. And it took me a while to get my head around that, having been, doing the leadership thing for a while. But you could tell that their culture was strong, and it came from the top down. And at one point, someone said, "Oh, that's the CEO." I said, "Oh, really? I thought this was the employee cap." He said, "No, it's the cafeteria. We all eat together." And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
sitting with the troops from a military perspective, and the leader that day, there's nobody else in there, dressed very casually, professionally, but casually like everybody else. And I watched as the leader picked up their food and walked around and just stopped at about 4 or 5 tables, little back slaps, and like, how's it going? You could see that he was engaging people. And I thought that was wonderful. that comes at an effort. If you've worked, I've had high level corporate jobs and I'd close my door for 2 hours to get my emails done. And sure, I'm getting my email done, but am I out seeing what's happening with my team? Or am I showing them that we're all working together? So again, there's no one recipe for one organization, but say it's never going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen because you create a policy for it. It has to be lived. And when your own the test, I think, or the KPI, if you will, is when your own frontline staff are repeating back to you your own values and actually living them. And I know it sounds easy, but it can happen. I've seen organizations change through changes in leadership or a significant investment. What's killer is organizations go, oh, we have this new initiative about culture. This sounds like what we did last year, the year before, but there's three different names for it, and they roll their eyes at because there's no true investment in that. So
Yeah.
that's my piece on culture.
I've been in places where, they've said we have a great culture and,
Mhm.
they have all these policies in place. And yet the leadership, you never saw them. Their parking was on the other side of the parking lot in a little kind of, I don't want to say cordoned off area, but a little area for, executives closer to the door so they didn't get hit by rain or snow. And they were in the top floor, off in one part of the building, which had, $1 million paintings and big mahogany desks. I always refer to it as mahogany row type thing. And I kind of, how can you say you have open door policies and you have great culture and specific values? You don't even interact with anybody. You don't even want to be seen by anybody. That's not creating a good culture. To me, it
No,
wasn't anyway.
the ivory tower approach like that, I've rarely seen strong cultures, like extremely rare where the culture's strong and that happens.
Mm.
I, uh, I just look, we do a Christmas dinner at the commanding officer serves the first dinner to the absolute lowest, newest person, lowest rank, and it's done purposefully in that. And it's a gesture to understand that none of the senior off and the officers run the food line. They're the ones putting your turkey on your plate, saying Merry Christmas. And none of those officers are successful without the troops that are actually planning and executing the missions. And it what a neat lesson and a neat way. And some people, oh, that subjugates your authority, your power. My view, if I have to walk in the room and go, oh, Alex, by the way, I'm the boss, I'm probably not a very effective boss, and that's not how I'm going to
Yeah.
earn your respect. Like it should be known by my behaviors. You're judged by what you do, not what you say often, right? And so it's espousing those behaviors. I trying to think of a general. I'm going to forget his name of a book I wrote. I didn't. I read, and he was talking about walking the floor and just getting out there and seeing the troops, taking an hour every day. And he brought many examples back of I had no idea this was happening with maintenance of vehicles because it's not the private and the corporal's job to be running into the commanding officers. But he said, I noticed that they were not struggling with these issues. And I just thought, what a cool example over a coffee. And what their perception was, he cares. And he's
Hmm.
checking in on. Yeah. So I thought just some interesting lessons.
Yeah. I wish more corporate leaders would do that. There are many that do.
There's some that do. There's some that do. I've seen some beautiful organizations that, and that's exact same type of behavior being out there. There's a certain humility. We all know you're the CEO. We all can go online and see how much the person makes. But to me, anytime there's elitism, private part, my personal view is that that's a culture killer.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move on to the one of the other points that you talked about in your extreme crisis leadership, uh, and that was naysayers.
Ah, if you are going to create culture change, so I'll go back to my context of having left the military in 2010 and going back into federal policing. And then specifically with the National Division Emergency Response Team, we were making changes in the culture. Part of what needed to happen there to prepare the team was some revised training that was outside of scope of traditional police training. So we've got emergency response teams across the country. We were out doing some training that was some of it was dangerous. It was well managed, but it was more dangerous than some of it. Some of it was new. Some of it had, we were doing some medical training that had some significant policy implications. And uh, and I had senior leadership going, what exactly are you doing? You're not running, you were at JTF2, this is not JTF3. And I said, I am not trying to create a military unit, not at all. But we're a federal police unit. There are other federal police units that support operations outside of the country. Example, a minister going to a failed state, Somalia. That was a tasking we had. If I had taken the team there before we'd done those trials, I would have been irresponsible. Okay, that was way too much risk. Might we have been successful? Yeah, but you always have to ask yourself at the end of an operation, am I good or good lucky? I didn't want to be that commander that came back with all the people when we were good lucky. Or if something did happen, that we had our best foot forward to come home. And I don't always get to decide in tactical operations. We say the enemy or the threat or the opposition gets a vote, or the market, if you will, in the corporate world, but we can decide our response. Coming back to the essence of your question about the naysayers, there were a lot of folks that, Rob, you shouldn't be doing this. There's too much risk. There's a balance between taking on too much risk, but if you are going to prepare yourself for those extreme crisis days, you're going to have to invest. And this goes back to my other point. The culture change takes time, and you're going to have to tune some of those because the easy thing is, no, we'll just stay status quo and follow policy. I'm not anti-policy and I'm not anti-compliance or governance. You have to have those things. But when they're the whole foundation to how your organization is going to adapt to the chaotic world we live in, we can't keep up. If you look in the corporate world now, people are throwing out their 5-year plans.
Hmm.
And before, if you didn't have a 5-year plan, Alex, people look at you like you get a consultant and you need a 5-year plan. And now people are like, can we really project 5 years out? I'm not a geopolitical or market analyst, and that, but the piece here is to invest early. And if you're going to be ready for those chaotic days, you're going to have to take some level of risk and especially invest in getting ready for those terrible days that are going to happen.
Yeah, you have to take the risk to be able to move forward. Otherwise
Absolutely.
you're either staying where you are or you're going to be sliding backwards.
Yeah. It's kind of like Blockbuster. Weren't they approached by
Yeah.
Netflix at one point?
Yeah.
Less than $1 million, and they're like, "Who are you, Netflix?" They
Net who?
didn't. They never saw it coming.
No, and look where they are now.
I sold my shares, Alex, at Blockbuster on your advice.
I did have a question about naysayers, though,
Yes,
in
sir.
regards to crisis leadership. Quite often, we have challenges with buy-in from executives
Mm,
to resilience or business continuity and emergency management, etc. All these cyber, not so much cyber, but all these other different areas. And they're naysayers, oh, we don't need that. We know what to do and things like that. Then when something happens, the first thing they start to do is, why don't we have a plan for this? Why don't we have this in place? And quite often, I've been in this situation. I'm sure you probably have. You just want to say, well, I told you so. You so how do you kind of deal with these naysayers to try and get them on board with some of this stuff?
yeah.
You know,
Unfortunately, just
before
humans. I
something
think
happens.
no. As humans, I think we can all like. There's things I should probably be doing around the house and things like that. And I'm like, it won't happen. So sometimes we're not. But I understand what you mean here. The On that one, these things can be used as an opportunity. Hopefully, you're not waiting till it's the worst thing that's happened. A couple things have been effective for me is something else happens in industry. If I look at when I was at Scotiabank and the Central Bank of Bangladesh was hacked, one of my mentors was a former RCMP officer as well. And he was the CISO at Scotiabank, and he had his team there. And I happened to be sitting in on the meeting for other reasons. And he said, folks, I want you to look at what happened to Bank of Bangladesh and could this happen to us? And one of his people started politely, boss, I'm not sure you understood, but it wasn't us. He goes, I know. That's not what I'm asking. Now that this report is out about how they got hammered, I want to understand, do we have these same gaps? And they go, but it's essential. He says, I want to know if these 18 findings can happen to us.
Mm.
And sure enough, they went through and there was a bunch. Now they were patched or me, but ahead of time. So my point here is looking what's happening in your industry and discussing it with your team, discussing it with your leadership above you is a good way to educate. Because sometimes they can have blinders on a little bit about, that will never happen to us. But when you tend to get closer to their own industry, so my context, Canadian banking, I'd often use, well, did you see what happened with one of our peer banks today? And they're like, and it would catch their attention. And that was my opportunity to, insert what level of change I was trying to put in place at the time. Yeah. So that helped with some of the naysayers. The other one was not assuming they completely understand your business. And that was an error I made. I'm they're police officers. Of course, they know what tactical operations are in my head. They had a perception of when it should be used and how it was used. Completely wrong. That's not on them. That's on me. That's my area of expertise. So one of the things that we've been doing for years, and we're famous for this, is running these demos. We blow stuff up and we run in and get some people and save them from the vehicle or the hostage. And it's all over in 4 seconds and everyone, that's wonderful. No one understood what happened with any of the people or what happened leading up to the operation. So we started, and this is something I took away from my time at the unit, running demos in slow time. And we would talk about a situation, we would talk about how we were set up, and nothing was when something was done dynamically, it was deliberate. We're like, okay, the sniper is about to take a shot. Everybody behind the scene, boom, and they would simulate taking the shot to take out the terrorist, for example. Okay, this is what just happened. Now the team will enter and go and try and recover the hostage and make sure that everything else is fine. This is happening at the exact same moment, but we slowed it down. And you could see the heads nod. Now, that's a very tactical example, but there's also policy things. I spoke of the medical training, and they're like, well, why would you need that? I spoke, you've asked us to go to Somalia. If one of us catches one over there, there's no 911 coming for something as simple as a 9 millimeter round, going through your arm. It would be horrific if someone bled out from a survivable injury. I'm not happy someone's getting injured, but we're the only ones going to be able to apply medical care to ourselves. And again, so I had to lay out that same scenario because there was some policy implications to what we were doing medically and that. So it's the education and slow time and not assuming that people understand your business and asking questions in an appropriate fashion.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We are talking about extreme crisis leadership today with Rob Currie, and we will be right back.